Reed Carver had been awake for 23 hours straight, and his brain had turned into something resembling cafeteria oatmeal. The kind that had been sitting under the heat lamp too long. He shuffled through the docking bay of Station Helios 7 with his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, following the painted yellow line on the floor with the determined focus of a man who had burned through every last reserve of cognitive function. 6 months. 6 months on that godforsaken mining outpost, breathing recycled air that always smelled faintly of lubricant and desperation. 6 months of 12-hour shifts coordinating cargo manifests while listening to the same 40 songs on the station's music loop. 6 months of protein paste disguised as food. He was done. Finished. The only thing standing between him and actual Earth-grown vegetables was a 3-week transport ride, and he was going to sleep through at least 2.5 of those weeks if it killed him. His comm unit had buzzed earlier with some automated message about docking reassignments, but Reed had learned long ago that 90% of station notifications were useless bureaucratic noise. The important stuff always got repeated. Probably something about bay renovations or schedule adjustments. Nothing that concerned a passenger who just needed to get from point A to point B without any additional complications. The ship loomed ahead through the observation window, sleek where most transports were boxy, with hull plating that seemed to shimmer with an opalescent quality under the station's lights. Fancy, Reed thought dimly. Maybe they'd upgraded the commercial fleet while he'd been out in the black. Good for them. As long as it had a bunk and didn't explode, he'd be happy. The airlock opened with a pneumatic hiss that sounded almost musical, which was odd, but Reed was too tired to care. He stepped through, expecting the usual cramped corridors of a transport vessel. Instead, he found himself in a passageway that curved gently upward, lined with panels that glowed with a soft, bioluminescent quality. Blue and green light pulsed beneath the surface like living things swimming just under ice. Huh. Really fancy. A small part of his brain, the part that wasn't currently drowning in exhaustion, noted that this seemed unusual for a commercial transport. But the larger, louder part of his brain pointed out that his assigned cabin number was right there on his ticket, and the corridor signs matched, and he was so tired that he could probably sleep on a pile of rocks if someone gave him a blanket. He found the cabin easily enough. The door opened at his touch, responding to his biometrics without the usual scan delay. The room beyond made him stop for a moment. It was easily twice the size of a standard passenger cabin, with a bed that looked like it had been grown rather than manufactured. The walls continued that strange bioluminescent pattern, and there was a viewport that stretched across one entire wall, currently displaying the station's exterior in crystalline detail. Reed dropped his duffel bag and sat on the edge of the bed. It conformed to his weight with an almost unsettling precision, like it was learning his shape. Definitely an upgrade. Maybe there had been a scheduling error and he'd lucked into a premium cabin. He wasn't going to complain. He wasn't going to do anything except fall face first into unconsciousness and wake up when someone told him they were approaching Earth orbit. He kicked off his boots, which smelled like they'd committed war crimes, and stretched out on the bed. Through the viewport, he watched station personnel moving around the docking bay in their reflective suits, performing the 100 small tasks that kept ships coming and going. One of them waved toward the ship, signaling something to someone. Probably just standard departure prep. Reed's eyes closed. The gentle thrum of what he assumed were engines powering up vibrated through the walls, almost soothing in its rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, he heard what sounded like voices, musical, lilting, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. Probably just the entertainment system in the common areas. Some ships played ambient sounds to help passengers relax. Sleep took him down like a weighted net, and for a blissful stretch of time, there was nothing but darkness and the absence of responsibility. He woke to the sensation of movement. Not the lurch of a ship detaching from a station, that had clearly happened while he was unconscious, but the steady, thrumming sensation of a vessel under full acceleration. The viewport now showed nothing but stars, which meant they were well away from Helios 7. Good. Progress. Earthward progress. Reed sat up, running his hands through his hair, which had achieved a gravity-defying level of chaos. His mouth tasted like something had died in it, and his stomach was informing him in no uncertain terms that protein paste consumed 24 hours ago was no longer cutting it. He needed food, water, and possibly a shower that didn't recycle the same 3 gallons of water through a filter that barely qualified as functional. The corridor outside his cabin was empty, still glowing with that strange living light. Reed followed what he hoped was the direction of the common areas, looking for signs or directions. The ship's layout was unusual, organic curves instead of the usual right angles, and everything seemed to flow into everything else without clear demarcation. Beautiful, in a way, but confusing when you were looking for something as basic as a mess hall. He rounded a corner and nearly collided with someone coming the other direction. "Sorry, he started to say, then stopped. The woman in front of him was tall, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders in a way that suggested it had never encountered the casual violence of station life. She wore a form-fitting uniform in deep blue, cut in a style Reed didn't recognize. Her eyes were large and remarkably green, with an intensity that suggested she was seeing more than just a disheveled passenger who'd wandered out of his cabin. And her ears. Her ears swept back from her head in an elegant curve, extending at least 3 inches longer than any human ears Reed had ever seen, tapering to delicate points. They stared at each other. Reed's brain, still booting up from sleep, tried to process what he was seeing. Costume? No, the ears moved, subtle little adjustments that tracked with her expression. Cosmetic modification? Seemed extreme. Alien? That would be insane. Aliens didn't crew commercial transport vessels. Aliens barely interacted with humans at all, and when they did, it made galactic news. The woman's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like delight. She tilted her head, studying him with unconcealed curiosity, and said something in that musical language he'd heard before, a cascade of syllables that sounded like water over stones. Reed's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I don't. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Not emergency klaxons, but a rhythmic chiming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The woman's eyes widened further, and she reached out to grip his arm with surprising strength, already turning back the way she'd come, pulling him along. "Wait, I think there's been a mistake," Reed managed, his voice coming out higher than he'd intended. "I'm supposed to be on the Meridian's Promise. Commercial transport. To Earth. This is." The woman glanced back at him, and despite whatever chaos, the woman with the impossible ears hadn't stopped smiling as she dragged Reed through corridors that seemed to pulse with approval at their passage. He stumbled along behind her, his mind doing Olympic-level gymnastics trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe he was still asleep. Maybe the protein paste had finally achieved sentience and was exacting revenge through hallucinogenic properties. They emerged into a chamber that made Reed's already fragile grasp on reality slip another notch. The space was circular, dominated by a central platform surrounded by what looked like living consoles, surfaces that rippled and shifted, displaying information in 3-dimensional projections that rotated and reorganized themselves without anyone touching them. The walls curved upward into a dome overhead, currently displaying what Reed assumed was a real-time view of the space around the ship. Stars wheeled past in a pattern that suggested they were moving fast. Really fast. And there were more of them. More women with those distinctive ears, perhaps a dozen scattered around the various stations, all turning to look at him with expressions ranging from shock to barely contained excitement. One of them actually dropped what she was holding, some kind of data tablet that didn't shatter when it hit the floor but instead sort of bounced, like it was made of something more forgiving than glass. At the center of it all stood a woman who could only be the captain. Reed knew this not because of any specific insignia. Her uniform was similar to the others, though perhaps slightly more elaborate, but because she carried herself with the kind of presence that didn't need announcement. She was tall, her dark hair pulled back in an intricate braid, and her ears were adorned with delicate metalwork that caught the light when she moved. Her eyes fixed on Reed with an intensity that made him want to apologize for existing, even though he was pretty sure none of this was his fault. She said something in that liquid language, and the woman who brought him responded with what sounded like an explanation, gesturing at Reed like he was an exhibit at a museum. He caught his name in there somewhere, Reed Carver, which at least confirmed they'd accessed his identification from the boarding scan. The captain's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, amusement, and something that might have been resignation. She approached him with measured steps, stopping just outside his personal space, and when she spoke, it was in perfectly accented standard. "You are on the wrong ship." Reed let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Yes. Thank you. I thought I was going crazy. There was a docking reassignment, I think, and I just got on the wrong. We are not the Meridian's promise. I'm getting that sense, yeah. We are the wandering echo." She paused, watching his face for recognition. When she found none, she continued. "We are Elrian." The word meant nothing to Reed. He tried to arrange his face into an expression that suggested he understood, but apparently failed, because the captain's mouth quirked into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You do not know what that means. I'm sorry, I've been on a mining outpost for 6 months and our cultural database was mostly repair manuals and cooking shows." "Are you?" He hesitated, then committed. "Are you aliens?" Someone behind him made a sound that was definitely a laugh. The captain raised one hand, and the room fell silent with a discipline that suggested military training. "We are Elrian," she repeated, slower this time. "We have been traveling in your space for nearly a century. Observing. Occasionally assisting with situations your species lacks the technology to address. We do not typically allow humans aboard our vessels." Reed processed this. "So I'm definitely on the wrong ship." "Profoundly so. And you're aliens." "By your definition, yes." "Okay." Reed looked around the command deck again, seeing it with new understanding. Not just advanced human technology, but something else entirely. Something that had been developed along completely different lines of thinking. "Okay. This is fine. This is totally fine. I'm having a normal one." The captain tilted her head in a gesture that reminded Reed of a bird studying a particularly interesting insect. "You are remarkably calm. I'm pretty sure I'm in shock. Ask me again in 5 minutes when my body realizes what's happening." That actually got a smile from her, brief but genuine. "I am Captain Sarah Valindra. You have already met Kessa, who escorted you here." She gestured at the woman who'd found him, who waved with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a celebrity. "How did you come to board my ship, Reed Carver?" Reed explained about the reassignment notification, his exhaustion, the cabin that had seemed too nice but not nice enough to be suspicious. As he spoke, he watched the captain's expression shift from stern attention to something that looked uncomfortably like she was trying not to laugh. "You were so tired," she said slowly, "that you boarded an alien reconnaissance vessel, walked through corridors with bioluminescent walls, slept in a room with technology you had never seen, and assumed it was simply an upgrade?" When she put it that way, Reed felt his face heat. "I've been awake for 23 hours and spent 6 months eating food that was technically nutritious but spiritually devastating. My decision-making was compromised." Another ripple of laughter from the crew. Captain Sarah held up her hand again, but Reed caught the amusement in her eyes before she suppressed it. "This presents a complication," she said. "We are currently 3 days into our mission trajectory. We have been tracking a spatial anomaly that appears to be consuming ships at the edge of human-explored space. Returning you to Station Helios 7 would require abandoning months of preparation and potentially allowing more vessels to disappear." Reed's stomach sank. 3 days? We've been traveling for 3 days. You slept very deeply. I was tired. Evidently. Sarah walked back toward the central platform, her hands moving across one of those rippling consoles. A star chart materialized in the air between them, showing their current position relative to Helios 7. They were very, very far away. I can offer you two options. The first is that we abort our mission, return you to the station, and hope that whatever is destroying ships decides to take a sabbatical while we reschedule our investigation. Reed swallowed. And the second option? You remain aboard as our guest until we complete our circuit. Approximately 6 standard weeks. During that time, you would help us understand certain aspects of human culture that may have evolved during our absence from direct contact. You would be the first human on an Elrian vessel in over 40 years. 40 years? We prefer to work in the shadows. Your presence here is unprecedented. Reed looked around the command deck. Every pair of eyes was on him now, and he realized that to these women, these aliens, he was just as strange as they were to him. Maybe stranger. The thought was oddly comforting. At least the feeling was mutual. If I stay, he said carefully, do I get to keep sleeping in that very comfortable bed? Sarah's smile returned. That can be arranged. And the food is better than protein paste. I would be insulted if it were not. Reed thought about Earth, still weeks away under the best circumstances. He thought about his tiny apartment and his boring job and the predictable trajectory of his life. He thought about the fact that he was standing on an alien ship surrounded by people who had been protecting humanity without asking for recognition, and how that was possibly the coolest thing that had ever happened to anyone, ever. I should probably be more concerned about this, he admitted. But honestly, 6 weeks of interesting beats 3 weeks of boring. I'm in. The cheer that erupted from the crew surprised him. Kessa actually clapped her hands together, and several others exchanged what looked like knowing glances. Captain Sarah nodded once, decisive. Welcome aboard the Wandering Echo, Reed Carver. Try not to break anything. Reed learned 3 things in his first week aboard the Wandering Echo. First, Elrian ships didn't have bathrooms in the traditional sense. They had what Kessa cheerfully called cleansing pods, that used some kind of molecular reorganization to remove dirt and dead skin cells. Second, he was apparently famous. And third, the Elrians found human idioms absolutely hilarious for all the wrong reasons. The fame part started on his second day, when he walked into what passed for a mess hall and conversation died like someone had hit a mute button. 37 women, all with those distinctive swept-back ears, turned to stare at him with the coordinated precision of a dance troupe. Reed had frozen in the doorway, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over him. This must be what zoo animals felt like during feeding time. Then someone in the back had called out something in Elrian, and the entire room had erupted in laughter and questions, everyone trying to talk at once. It turned out that the story of the exhausted human who'd accidentally boarded an alien reconnaissance vessel and then slept through 3 days of faster-than-light travel had spread through the crew with the efficiency of a computer virus. He'd become something of a legend. The universe's most oblivious man. Kessa had rescued him, guiding him to a seat and explaining that most of the crew had never seen a human up close. The Elrians who did interact with humanity were specialized diplomats or deep-cover observers, and they rarely shared details about their experiences. Reed represented a mystery, a novelty, and apparently a source of endless entertainment. The bathroom situation revealed itself on his 3rd day, when he'd finally worked up the courage to ask where he could take a shower. Kessa had led him to a small chamber off his cabin that contained what looked like a vertical coffin made of frosted crystal. Step inside, she'd instructed. The pod will analyze your biometric signature and calibrate the cleansing cycle. Reed had stared at the pod. That sounds like something that either works perfectly or turns me inside out. Those are the only 2 options. It works perfectly. We use them every day. You're not reassuring me. But he'd stepped inside anyway, because he was starting to smell like the inside of his boots, and that was a fate worse than molecular reorganization. The pod had hummed to life, surrounding him with a warm, tingling sensation that felt like being submerged in carbonated water. When it finished 30 seconds later, he'd emerged feeling cleaner than he'd ever been in his life, his hair somehow styled better than when he'd actually tried to style it, and his skin smelling faintly of something that wasn't quite flowers but wasn't not flowers either. The only problem was that the pod wouldn't turn off. It kept cycling, the hum building to a concerned whine, until Reed had stumbled out and called for help. 3 engineers had shown up, all of them trying very hard not to laugh as they explained that the pod had become confused by his human biology and thought it hadn't finished the job. They'd had to manually reset the entire system. "You broke our bathroom," one of them had said, grinning. "I didn't mean to. No human has ever broken our bathroom before." "Congratulations." The idiom disaster happened during his first official, cultural exchange session. Captain Sarah had assigned a crew member named LYSS to be his guide and interpreter. LYSS was the ship's primary engineer, a woman who spoke so fast that Reed sometimes lost track of what language she was using, and who had apparently learned standard from intercepted human broadcasts and technical manuals. She'd appeared at his cabin door on his 4th day, vibrating with barely contained energy. "Human Reed. Today I show you the engine core. You will be amazed. Your mind will be exploded." Reed had followed her through a maze of corridors that seemed to reconfigure themselves when he wasn't looking, finally arriving at a massive chamber that housed what looked like a small star contained in concentric rings of that same rippling technology he'd seen throughout the ship. The light it cast was simultaneously warm and cold, and Reed could feel it in his chest like a second heartbeat. "This," LYSS had announced proudly, "is the heart of the ship. We call it the resonance core. It converts quantum probability into directed motion by collapsing wave functions across dimensional membranes." Simple, yes. Absolutely none of those words made sense in that order. LYSS had laughed, delighted. "You are honest. I like this. Many humans pretend to understand when they do not. It makes them seem." She'd paused, searching for the word. "Full of themselves." "Full of themselves works, yeah. This is good phrase. But also, why are they full? Full of what? Are they eating too much?" Reed had tried to explain the idiom, which had led to LYSS asking about other phrases, which had somehow resulted in him attempting to clarify the difference between break a leg and actually breaking a leg. The conversation had spiraled into chaos when he'd mentioned that humans sometimes said they were dying, when they were actually just very embarrassed. "But you are not dying," LYSS had said, genuinely concerned. "You are standing here. You are alive. It's hyperbole. Exaggeration for effect. So humans lie about their medical status for entertainment. When you put it that way, it sounds worse than it is." She dragged him to the mess hall after that, where she proceeded to test various idioms on the assembled crew. The concept of raining cats and dogs had caused a minor panic until Reed explained it was just a way of saying heavy rain. Someone had asked why humans didn't just say heavy rain, and Reed had no good answer. The phrase piece of cake led to 15 minutes of debate about why humans associated ease with dessert, and whether that suggested a cultural obsession with sugar that explained their shorter lifespans. By the time Captain Sarah had arrived to see what the commotion was about, Reed was trying to explain break the ice to an audience that couldn't understand why anyone would need to break ice when you could simply raise the temperature, and wasn't that dangerous anyway. What if someone was standing on the ice? Sarah had listened to approximately 30 seconds of the chaos before holding up one hand. Silence fell immediately. "Engineer LYSS," she'd said calmly, "you are tormenting our guest. He is teaching me human culture. You assigned this. I assigned you to guide him. Not to deconstruct his language until he questions his own species' intelligence." LYSS had looked unrepentant. "But the humans say head over heels when that is already the normal position of the head. Why not heels over head, which would actually be different?" Reed had laughed so hard he'd started crying, which had caused another round of concern because the Elrians had thought something was wrong with his eyes. Sarah had watched him with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering every decision that had led to this moment. But later, after the mess hall had cleared and Reed was walking back to his cabin, Sarah had fallen into step beside him. "You are adapting well," she'd said. I'm trying to break your bathroom and confuse your engineer. That's adapting. You are not afraid. Many humans would be terrified in your situation. Alone on a ship full of aliens, weeks from home, no way to contact your people. Reed considered this. It was true that he probably should be more frightened. But every interaction he'd had with the Elrians had been marked by curiosity, humor, and a kind of gentle patience that suggested they genuinely wanted to understand him. You haven't given me a reason to be afraid, he'd said finally. Sarah had smiled at that, and Reed had realized it was the first time he'd seen her smile without it being tinged with command authority or calculated assessment. It was just a smile. Good, she'd said. Keep not breaking things, Reed Carver. We still have 5 weeks together. As she'd walked away, Reed had realized that 5 weeks suddenly didn't seem like nearly enough time. The alarm wasn't like the musical chiming Reed had heard when he'd first been discovered. This was urgent, insistent, a rhythm that made his heart rate spike before his conscious mind even registered what was happening. He'd been in the mess hall, attempting to teach 3 crew members how to play poker with a deck of cards he'd fashioned from spare data tablets, when the sound cut through their laughter like a blade. Every Elrian in the room was moving before Reed could even stand up. They flowed toward their stations with practiced efficiency, and Reed found himself suddenly alone at the table, holding a makeshift Queen of Hearts and wondering if he should follow or stay out of the way. Kessa appeared at his elbow so quickly he jumped. Come. Captain wants you on the command deck. Why would she want me? I don't know how to do anything. She did not say why. She said come. So we come. The command deck was controlled chaos when they arrived. The dome overhead showed something Reed's brain struggled to process, a tear in space that looked like someone had taken reality and crumpled it like paper. Around it, debris floated in slowly rotating patterns, pieces of what had probably been ships, now just twisted metal catching the light of distant stars. Captain Sarah stood at the central platform, her hands moving through holographic displays that shifted and reorganized faster than Reed could track. She glanced up when he entered, and he was struck by how different she looked. This wasn't the amused captain who'd watched him butcher human idioms. This was someone who'd made hard decisions and would make more before the day ended. We have intercepted a distress signal, she said without preamble. Human research station, approximately 400,000 kilometers from that anomaly. They have power failure, life support compromised. They are requesting immediate evacuation. Reed looked at the tear in space, at the debris field around it. That's what you've been tracking. For 6 months. It has consumed 12 vessels that we know of. Your human authorities classify them as navigational errors, equipment failures. They do not want to acknowledge something they cannot explain. But you can explain it. We can stop it. Eventually. First, we save the people it has not yet killed. The ship lurched into motion, and Reed grabbed the nearest console to keep his balance. The movement felt different than before, more aggressive, purposeful. Through the dome, he watched as they closed the distance to the research station, a small structure that looked like it had been assembled from prefabricated modules. Several sections were dark, and one appeared to have been partially crushed by some invisible force. Engineering, status on the anomaly, Sarah called out. LYSS's voice came through with that distinctive rapid-fire cadence. It is expanding, Captain. Slowly, but expanding. If we remain in proximity more than 20 minutes, we will fall within its influence sphere. Understood. Helm, take us to docking range. What followed was the most terrifying ballet Reed had ever witnessed. The wandering echo moved through the debris field like it was dancing, the ship itself seeming to anticipate where obstacles would be before they appeared. He realized the consoles weren't just displaying information, they were responding to the crew's intentions, creating a feedback loop between thought and action that no human technology could match. They matched velocity with the station, and a team assembled near the airlock with equipment that looked both medical and mechanical. Sarah turned to Reed, and he was surprised to see calculation in her eyes rather than dismissal. You will come with the rescue team, she said. I'm not trained for rescue operations. I coordinate cargo manifests. The humans on that station will be terrified. They will see Elrian faces and assume many things, most of them incorrect. You will help them understand that we are not a threat. Reed wanted to argue, but she was right. If he'd been trapped on a failing station and aliens showed up to rescue him, he'd probably assume he was hallucinating or dead. Okay. Yes. What do I do? Stay close to Kessa. Do not touch anything. Explain that we are friends. Are we friends? Humanity and the Elrians? Sarah's expression softened slightly. We are trying to be. The docking procedure took 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. When the airlock finally opened, Reed followed Kessa and 4 others into the station's corridors. The gravity was failing, giving everything a dreamlike quality as they pulled themselves along handholds. Emergency lighting flickered, and Reed could hear the groan of metal under stress, a sound that suggested the station was very close to coming apart entirely. They found the survivors huddled in what looked like a common area, 9 people in various states of panic and oxygen deprivation. When the Elrians entered, one woman actually screamed. A man lunged toward them, then stopped when he saw Reed. Wait, the man said, his voice hoarse. Wait, you're human. What's happening? Who are these people? Reed floated forward, trying to project calm he absolutely did not feel. I'm Reed. I'm from Station Helios 7. These are Elrians. They're here to help. They picked up your distress signal. Elrians? There's no such species in the database. Yeah, they're kind of a secret. Long story. Right now, we need to get you off this station before it gets pulled into that thing outside. Kessa was already moving through the group, scanning each person with a device that hummed softly. 3 have significant oxygen debt, she reported. 1 has a broken arm. All can be moved safely if we do it now. One of the researchers, a young woman with wild hair and wilder eyes, grabbed Reed's arm. What is that thing? The anomaly? We were studying quantum fluctuations and then it just appeared. It's been growing for 3 days. They know what it is, Reed said, nodding toward the Elrians. They're going to fix it. But first, they're going to fix you. Trust me, I've been on their ship for 2 weeks and they haven't done anything weird to me. Your definition of weird is concerning, Kessa muttered, but she was smiling. The evacuation went smoothly despite Reed's expectations of disaster. The Elrians moved the injured with a gentleness that seemed at odds with their efficiency, and within 10 minutes they were all aboard the Wandering Echo. The rescued humans stared around the command deck with expressions that cycled through shock, wonder, and deep confusion. One man kept touching the bioluminescent walls like he expected them to bite him. Sarah approached the group, and Reed watched as 9 pairs of human eyes focused on her ears with laser intensity. You are safe, she said simply. We are taking you to the nearest human outpost. Medical care will be provided during transit. You will have questions. We will answer what we can. Why? The researcher with wild hair asked. Why help us? Why risk your ship? Sarah looked at Reed for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. Because watching people die when we have the ability to save them would make us something we choose not to be. The Wandering Echo pulled away from the station just as another section collapsed, pulled toward the anomaly by forces Reed couldn't begin to understand. He stood next to Kessa, watching the tear in space pulse and shift like a living thing. Can you really stop it? He asked quietly. Eventually, Kessa said. But now we have witnesses. Now humans know we exist. Reed looked at the 9 researchers scattered around the command deck, being tended to by Elrian medical staff, staring at technology that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about the universe. Yeah, he said slowly. I guess you do. The rescued researchers had been transferred to a human outpost 3 days ago, and Reed had watched them leave with a strange mixture of relief and loss. They'd spent their time aboard asking questions, documenting everything they could, and generally behaving like academics who'd stumbled into the discovery of a lifetime. Which, Reed supposed, they had. Before they left, the woman with wild hair, Dr. Sarah Chen, he'd learned, had pulled him aside. "You know this changes everything, right? We can't not report this. The Elrians exist. They've been helping us. People need to know." Reed had glanced at Captain Sarah, who'd been standing close enough to hear. She'd simply nodded once, and Reed had understood that this had always been the point. The rescue hadn't been an accident of timing. It had been a choice. Now the wandering Echo was completing its circuit, approaching the coordinates where Reed would transfer back to human space. 6 weeks had passed in what felt like 6 days, and Reed's cabin, the one he'd stumbled into by accident, was mostly packed. His duffel bag sat on the bed that had learned his shape, and he couldn't quite bring himself to seal it closed. There was a chime at his door, the musical tone he'd learned meant someone wanted to enter. "Come in," he called, and wasn't surprised when LYSS bounded through, carrying what looked like a data crystal wrapped in cloth. "Human Reed. I have made you a thing." She thrust the package at him with the enthusiasm of someone presenting a rare treasure. "It is a complete technical manual for Elrian engine design, translated into standard, with notes I have added explaining the parts your human physics cannot yet properly describe." Reed took the crystal carefully. "LYSS, I don't think I'm supposed to have this. Isn't this, like, classified alien technology?" "Probably. But you asked good questions. You wanted to understand, not just to use. This is rare." She paused, then added with uncharacteristic seriousness, "Also, your people will need it eventually. Better they learn from someone who wants to teach than someone who wants to sell." Before Reed could respond, Kessa appeared in the doorway, followed by 3 other crew members he'd gotten to know over the weeks. They were all holding things, small tokens, he realized. A piece of the hull plating that shifted colors in response to touch. A star chart showing regions of space humanity hadn't yet explored. A data chip containing what appeared to be the entire cultural database of Elrian music, which Reed had discovered was both beautiful and structurally baffling. "You are all going to get in trouble for giving me this stuff," Reed said, but he was smiling. "Captain's orders," Kessa said cheerfully. "She said if you are to be our bridge to humanity, you should have bridges to bring back." The gathering in his cabin grew as more crew members arrived, until Reed was surrounded by women who'd started as aliens and had somehow become friends. They shared stories, mostly embarrassing ones about Reed. The bathroom incident had achieved legendary status, and someone produced what passed for Elrian alcohol, which tasted like starlight might if starlight could ferment. Captain Sarah arrived last, standing in the doorway and surveying the impromptu party with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and fondness. "I see my crew has decided to abandon all pretense of dignity. We are saying goodbye with dignity," LYSS protested. "Very dignified goodbye. With gifts and stories and only a small amount of drinking." "The amount is not small, engineer. It is small for Elrians. For human Reed, it might be medium." Reed had indeed stopped after half a glass, recognizing that alien alcohol and human biology probably shouldn't experiment too much. He caught Sarah's eye and she tilted her head toward the corridor, an invitation. He excused himself from the party and followed her to the observation deck, a small chamber he'd discovered in his second week that offered an unobstructed view of space. They stood side by side, watching stars slide past as the ship moved through the universe with that impossible grace he'd come to associate with Elrian technology. "The transfer shuttle will arrive in 4 hours," Sarah said finally. "From there, you will be taken to Station Helios 7. Your original destination was Earth, I believe." "Yeah. Though at this point, I'm not sure what I'm going back to. My job is probably gone. My apartment lease definitely expired. And I have information in my head that's probably going to make me very popular with very intense people. Dr. Chen and her colleagues will have reported our existence by now. There will be questions. Investigations. Fear, in some quarters. Wonder, in others. Sarah turned to face him fully. This is what we wanted, Reed. The Elrian leadership has been debating for decades whether to reveal ourselves. Whether humanity was ready. Whether we could trust your species not to panic or weaponize the knowledge of our existence. And now. Now we have data. You, specifically. Your reactions, your adaptability, your willingness to trust when trust was not required. You became our test case without knowing it. Reed thought about his first day, stumbling into the command deck in confusion and exhaustion. I feel like I should be offended, but honestly, I'm mostly flattered. So what's the verdict? Is humanity ready? Sarah smiled, and it was the warmest expression he'd seen from her. No species is ever truly ready for first contact. But you showed us that humans can adapt, can laugh at themselves, can build friendships across the vast difference between our peoples. That is enough. So what happens now? You come out of the shadows. Park over Earth and say hello. Something slower. More careful. But yes. We will begin diplomatic contact. Formal exchanges. And we will need someone who understands both peoples. Someone who can translate not just language, but intent. Culture. Someone who has already proven they can survive on an Elrian ship without breaking too many things. Reed felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. Are you offering me a job? I am offering you a choice. Return to your old life, which you have already admitted holds little appeal. Or return as our liaison. Help us navigate humanity, and help humanity navigate us. It would not be easy. There would be suspicion, bureaucracy, people who would see you as a traitor for working with aliens. And there would be travel. Meeting new people. Learning impossible things. Being part of something bigger than cargo manifests and protein paste. Yes. Reed looked out at the stars, at the infinite possibilities stretched across the darkness. 6 weeks ago, he'd been exhausted, bored, running on autopilot through a life he'd stopped really living. Now he was standing on an alien ship, being offered the chance to be part of history. I'm going to need a better wardrobe, he said finally. I only packed for a 3-week transport. Sarah laughed, and the sound was like music. That can be arranged. 4 hours later, Reed stood at the airlock with his duffel bag, now stuffed with impossible gifts and technology that would probably give human scientists collective heart attacks. The crew had assembled to see him off, and there had been more hugs than he'd expected. LYSS had cried, which had made him cry, which had caused mild panic until Kessa explained that humans also did the water from eyes thing when emotional. Captain Sarah walked him to the shuttle, a small human vessel that looked almost pathetically simple next to Elrian technology. You will contact us when you are ready, she asked. Give me 2 weeks to deal with the bureaucracy and find a place to live. Then yes. I'll be ready. And if you change your mind? If you decide this is too much? Reed thought about the question. He thought about the bathroom he'd broken, the idioms he'd butchered, the fear in the researcher's eyes turning to wonder. He thought about learning to see the universe through different eyes, about friendship that crossed the gap between species. I won't change my mind, he said. I got on the wrong ship. Best mistake I ever made. Sarah extended her hand, and Reed shook it. Her grip was firm, her smile genuine. Welcome to the bridge between worlds, Reed Carver. Try not to break it. Reed boarded the shuttle, and as it pulled away from the wandering echo, he looked back at the ship that had become home. Through the windows, he could see the crew waving, their distinctive ears catching the light. He waved back, grinning like an idiot, already counting the days until he could return. He'd gotten on the wrong ship. But somehow, impossibly, he'd ended up exactly where he was supposed to be.